So, Armands already mentioned that something will change after the May 25th. Who of you know what GDPR stands for? Okay, that's good. And who of you have a business in Europe? Okay, fewer. And do you think GDPR will relate to you and it will change your business, or you are indifferent and you feel ready to get to the 25th of May safely? Are you safe for 25th of May? Okay, so. Okay, then I will let Ieva start about what those changes will be from the legal side, and I will continue from the IT side. So, Ieva.
So again, hello everybody. So General Data Protection Regulation, that is what stands behind this abbreviation GDPR, and that is the new law governing how we will process data in the European Union after May 25. It's not like a revolution of data processing, because in European Union we have had a quite sound framework for data protection already for more than 20 years. There has been a directive governing data protection, and in general, data protection stems from a human right to privacy. We each, as a human person, as a natural entity, have a right to the privacy, to have certain things to keep on our own. Probably some information on our family, probably some information on your hobbies, on your health. There is lots of information which is your personal data, which you want to keep for yourself. And the European Union has created a legislative framework how to protect this. Previously, this was this directive on data processing. Directive in European Union is like a legislative instrument which gives general guidelines how things should be done, but in reality, in member states, it was implemented by a separate law in each country. So actually, there was a bit of chaos. There were 28 separate laws governing data protection in European Union. And for businesses, it was very difficult. If you did business in more than one European Union member state, you had to read 28 laws on data protection, and you had to obtain consents in 28 different ways, and you had to draft your privacy policies in 28 different ways. Very difficult. And that's why we have this new GDPR, which creates a uniform legal framework how data processing should be done. That's why it's a regulation, which is a directly applicable instrument. It will be enforced directly as it is, and there will be no implementing laws. There will be just explaining laws, if I may say so, which will explain in more details some issues provided by the regulation, but the general ideas and principles will be set by this GDPR. And how do we move the slides forward? Sorry? So, in fact, what it means to be GDPR ready, that will be our focus of today. Actually, I will be honest that initially we wanted to talk more about what comes next after the GDPR and what is the big data and what are the next European Union activities after the introduction of GDPR. But luckily, Kristaps went to the reception last night, talked with some of the guests and understood that actually we are living in kind of a GDPR bubble, because me and Kristaps, we have talked about GDPR already to many audiences, and we thought, oh, everybody knows about that. Let's talk about something new, what comes next. But then we understood, no, probably we have to speak about GDPR once again and to try to explain and to show some signposts how to be GDPR ready, because the regulation as such, it's a very, very long text. It's boring. It's boring even for lawyers. It's even more boring, if I may say so, for IT specialists. And it's difficult to read and it's difficult to understand. But we believe in our practice we have found some signposts how to move forward, and it is indeed necessary because the recent survey showed that in general very few businesses really are aware what it means to be ready for the GDPR. What does it mean to be in line with the legal requirements on data processing? We see that actually just 10% of Latvian companies say that they are completely ready for GDPR, and another minority, 12%, say that they are preparing, they are in progress in preparing to GDPR. So actually, we cannot talk about GDPR readiness if we do not have a full GDPR awareness yet, and we don't, because the striking 41% of companies say that they do not process any data. Do you think it may be true? Please raise your hand. No hands. Very good. So you know that actually any company does process data. I cannot imagine a company which wouldn't have even a single employee. Of course, a self-employed person, but a company would have at least some employees. And if you have employees, you do process personal data. You cannot conclude an employment contract without asking, what's your name? What's your identity code? What's your bank account number in order to pay out the salary? So at least some data are being processed by any company. And then comes the clients, the customers. If your customers are natural entities, people like us, then of course you do process personal data, and very often on a large scale and in large volumes. Or if your clients are legal entities, just companies, for example, you are manufacturing computers and you are selling them to wholesalers, so your clients are legal entities. You could say, well, I don't process personal data of my clients. Really? But what about the managers of those legal entities, the persons with whom you contact in order to negotiate the contract, the persons who sign the contract on behalf of your customer? These are all natural entities. These are all people whose personal data you have to collect, store, and probably even give to somebody else in order to do your business. So most of the companies do some kind of data processing, and therefore the General Data Protection Regulation does apply. The good news is that large companies are very well aware of that already. We see from this survey that almost half of large companies with an annual turnover over 5 million euros are ready for the GDPR. They have done their homework, they have read the long and boring GDPR, and they have understood what they have to do in order to become ready for those new laws of data processing. And even more, the rest half of those large companies are preparing for that, are in the process of preparing to GDPR. And I'll tell you why. The selling point of the GDPR, if I can say so, is the enormous and huge penalties for non-compliance. If previously these many data protection laws I mentioned before, which existed before GDPR, there the penalties were quite small. Actually, one of my clients said some couple of years ago, well, I don't really care for data protection laws because the penalties are so small, but the compliance costs are so large. It's easier for me to pay the penalty if I get penalized, if the state authorities come. So, not so after 25 of May, because the penalties for violation of GDPR can reach 4% of the global turnover of the company. So imagine 4%, striking, awful. And it, of course, kind of lights on a bulb in the head of any prudent CEO, and he says, I have to get GDPR compliant. And that's why we see these numbers that large companies are getting ready for the GDPR. So, but what does it actually mean to become ready for GDPR? Let me step back just one step in history again and tell you what GDPR requires, how it is different from the previous regulation of data processing. Basically, it is nothing fundamentally new. It is based on the same principles of data processing which were enforced before. That is very briefly fair and transparent data processing principle, that you have to process data in a fair manner in relation to your customer. Secondly, that is purpose limitation principle, that you have to gather only those data which are really necessary to do your business. For example, if you want to deliver your computer to your customer, you need to know his name and address, but probably you don't need to know his birth data, so you don't request his birth data. And that's the data minimization principle. Then there is the storage limitation principle, which provides that data should not and must not be stored longer than it is necessary. You cannot collect data and just store them for some need you do not yet know. You have to delete it when you don't need it anymore. And then there is the new transparency principle and accountability principle, which is the new principle introduced by GDPR and which actually makes much work for us as lawyers and IT specialists, because right now the company not only needs to observe all those principles for data protection, but also needs to demonstrate that it has observed them. It has to have a paper trail behind every data processing action and decision. So lots of new documents have to be created actually in order to be and become GDPR ready and compliant. So how do we usually suggest this process to be carried out? There are many methods, and ORS by far is not the single one and probably not the best one, but we have found it the most workable one, which actually creates a step-by-step approach how to understand the GDPR and to apply it. And we divide this readiness process in two blocks. One is legal readiness. Very shortly, get your all documents together and correct. And the other side is the IT side, because it will not help that you have the most wonderful privacy policy in the world, the best data protection guidelines, if in fact your IT systems are not secure, and if data leaks are possible, and if there are vulnerabilities in the IT networks, then it will not work. And therefore, we approach every GDPR compliance and implementation project from those both blocks. And the first step, what we do is the audit. From legal side, the audit is that we talk with the company, with its people, and we understand what data the company processes. Are these only employee data, perhaps in the simplest cases? Are these client data, customer data, persons of representatives of your clients? Perhaps it's a video surveillance if you have video camera in your offices. So we check what data are processed, for what reasons, how it happens, who has access to them, and what documents currently exist to document those processes. Do you have a sticker on your door notifying your guests that you have video cameras? Do you or do you not, for example? So it's basically just checking talking with people and understanding how our data processed. And from IT side,
Yes, from IT side. So we have told a lot about data information. So this is a regulation about data, and it expects from you to have a lot of information about how the data is stored and audit logs and documentations and so on and so on. But you also have to think not only what and why, but how and where. So where are you keeping all the data? Are those some shelves inside your HR where everyone basically can go into that office room and access to those documents, or are those are the data in the safe somewhere kept safe, or most probably it's in some kind of digital format already. And this digital format could be database, which is the most common one, and the most simple one to understand with all your clients or your partners, what they are buying, what they are selling, why they are doing it, maybe some cookie data from your website, which helps you profile your customers and so on. But there are the other category, the non-structured data, which is the biggest concern for most, because those are the emails you are receiving and sending with all the signatures and personal info, and those are documents you are storing in my documents folders, and forbid if those documents or emails somehow end up on your employees' PCs at home, and from there anything can happen. So you have to keep in mind what information storages you have, and how do you swap this information both inside the company and outside the company, so externally. You have to audit that procedure and see where you are standing at the moment. So from the IT side, keep in mind emails, file storages, and devices. Those are the first most important things. But to the rest we'll get later. Oh, yeah.
so after we have done this audit, both from the document side and from the devices and the hardware and software side, we go to the recommendations and gap analysis, which from legal side again is quite a boring and bureaucratic job, that you check what data currently you are processing and how does it go together with the requirements of GDPR. For example, do you have the right legal basis for data processing? Because the GDPR requests that any data processing must be based on some of the legal bases listed in the regulation. These most common legal basis would be the execution of contract. For example, you just cannot deliver your product if you don't know the address of the person to whom you must deliver. So you need these data just for the execution of the contract. Another very commonly used legal basis is the legitimate interest of the company, which would be used if you use video cameras for surveillance of your offices. You do it in order to protect your company, your people against threats, against crimes. So that's legitimate interest. Also, many data processing is being carried out just because it's required by the law, and accounting and financial reporting is a prime example, because you have to have lots of data about your employees and about your transactions, which may also contain personal data, in order to submit reports to the authorities, collecting taxes and paying support. So it's just required by law, it's not your choice. And curiously, the consent, which is probably the most famous legal basis for data processing, is by far not the best one, because GDPR provides new requirements how the consent should be obtained and when the consent is valid. And as a result, the consent has become the most fragile and most unstable legal basis for data processing. So if you have previously processed some personal data just on the basis of personal consent, it's certainly a red flag pointed out within this gap analysis, and very often the recommendation is to reconsider the legal basis and to apply another stronger base and not the personal consent. So, and further on in this gap analysis, we clarify what documents the company is missing to prove that it is processing personal data as required by law. Very often we recommend drafting some additional documents or amending the existing ones. So it's just legal recommendations, basically, nothing very complicated.
Yes, here I want to focus on the goal. So what do we want to achieve by implementing all those legal processes and policies and so on? So you all have come to this conference. You probably, just as myself, you got several emails reminding about this conference. You have an application which helps you plan your agenda here, which meetings, which presentations you will attend, everything's here. Also here on your badges. So if you went to a conference 15 or 10 years ago, it would be a whole lot different. You would get a few emails at most, and you will have some A4 paper with the whole agenda in a really plain format, probably. So the point I'm trying to make, today we have a whole lot of information, and to buy people's attention, it's a hard work, it's marketing. And to be honest, is here anyone who has read their company's privacy policy and data guidelines, security guidelines? Probably not, because those are long-winded documents. They are legally very fine and compliant, makes your company compliant, but they are boring to read. So what you should target here is clarity. Clarity is the keyword which should be kept on your target. So it would be clear processes for everyone, so they are not just legally compliant, but think about your employees, how they will perform those actions, how they will label their emails and documents, whether those are confidential or publicly available. So there is no misinformation and no information leaks from your company by accident, by some perhaps hidden Excel rows and the wrong email in the to box in the email application. So a lot of Johns, a lot of Kristaps, a lot of Ievas here. It's really easy to send email to the wrong Kristaps, not in Squalio perhaps, but on the client side with the whole wrong Excel with a whole lot of personal data. In fact, Boeing last year unfortunately did that and had quite problems after that. So aim for the clarity, and when you're choosing the tools that you will use to achieve this, choose something that will provide, that will help you label those documents, that will help to have each employee just a single password, because on IT side, each of us have to deal with many services, with emails, with documents, with some proprietary business systems. It's a lot of work for the employee. The password has to be changed monthly, perhaps, and those passwords usually end up on the monitor or in the drawer next to them. And in practice, it's not good. So even with the good documentation, you have to have clarity. Aim for the clarity for the employees and on your processes.
All right, and when you have the good aims, what to achieve, and you know what to achieve, you really have to implement, and that is the third stage in order to become compliant and ready for the GDPR. It is really to carry through what you have found out you have to do. From legal side, again, it's quite a paperwork. if the audit has been done well, if the recommendations are clear, then it's basically just drafting documents. You have to draft most likely new privacy policies for the web page because the GDPR implements new requirements, how the privacy policy should look like and what information should be provided. You also have to draft the cookie policy if you did not have such in your web page and you do gather cookies. A very nice document to have is an employee handbook on the data processing, which is very similar probably to other handbooks you have in your company, such as quality management handbook, client management handbook. So add another handbook. Paperwork, but it makes things easier because GDPR also introduces new rights of your clients and employees, for example, to come to you when the full moon shines or whatever and give requests to you. Please submit to me all the data and all the information you hold about me. Whenever it was gathered, and I don't care how you got it and how you can give it to me, but give it to me all. And in fact, you have to respond to such requests. Not always will you have to give all the required information, but you will have to respond to the request in 30 days and either give this information or explain why you cannot give it. For example, you do not have it anymore, you don't store it, or it's impossible to give it without breaking rights of other persons, but you have to respond to such weird requests sometimes. And therefore, it's very useful to have internal guidelines, instructions for your employees to know how to handle such requests. Then some other additional documents have to be prepared. For example, the GDPR requests introducing a new document called a data processing register. Again, a long, boring document listing all the data processing activities carried out by your company. It's bureaucracy, yes, but on the other hand, it ensures the transparency and accountability. So in case the local data protection authority would come to your company and request, how do you process data? So you present, here is my data processing register, my data processing record, here is all what I can do. I am compliant with GDPR. So it's drafting with purpose to provide information. And if your company has all these documents, then it is GDPR ready, at least from the legal side.
Yes, and on the IT side, you can help with electronic data registry, perhaps, because it's a lot of work to do it on Excel or do it somehow on paper even. That's really a lot of work. So you can have some electronic data registry. You can ask me if you want one. And the other thing which Ieva already mentioned is this date subject request. So imagine what would happen to you if on 28th, let's say 28th of May, John Doe or Jānis Bērziņš for you Latvians came to your company and asked all the information. Probably you would have to look through all your employees' PCs, all their laptops, mobile devices, my documents folders, email inbox folders, so on. And probably they would have to do it themselves, and you would have to trust them that they have did it correctly, and probably they will have to spend a lot of their resources to follow the handbook, to follow the legal procedures. It's easier if you have all the data, all the documents, all the emails in one place. So just like on the internet, like on Google, you can just search for Jānis Bērziņš or John Doe and find him or her and give all the information. So what I want you to think about here is centralization. If here our goal is to create clarity, then centralization can help with that. Because centralization will let you spend less resources on managing and administration work, also for your employees, for remembering passwords and understanding all the different systems, but use one or a few really good solutions that support their most necessary needs.
And the peculiar thing is that it is just the beginning, because getting GDPR ready is a never-ending story. It's not like that you draft all those documents we mentioned, implement the ICE systems to make things easier and more clear and central, because you have to be GDPR compliant all the time after May 25. And especially, for example, if your company is introducing new ways how to process data, developing new business lines, then data protection must be considered always. There is this notion, data protection by design, used by the GDPR, which means that always when you do new things within your business, you have to consider data protection. You have to check the relevant and correct legal basis for this data processing. You gather only so much data that you need, and you store them in correct way. And also, therefore, these privacy policies and data processing records will have to be updated from time to time. And the reason why it is so is that the European Union is very serious about data today, not only about personal data, but also about non-personal data and the big data. And so that is what we will talk about in the remaining time.
So yes, let's pretend you are completely ready for the GDPR, you understand everything, and we can move on past the 25th of May to the next big thing. And one of those big things is big data. You already heard something about Internet of Things. You probably are hearing a lot about this open data and AI, and there's a reason, because at each given period there is some buzzword. Big data started at 2013, around 2013, and it grew quite a lot, and currently it's in the plateau because it's a commodity. Many companies use it already, takes advantage of it, some don't. And basically, if you're not in it, if you don't use it, then you're out of it and you're missing out. And that's one of the points European Union now wants to solve, so everyone can jump on the big data, because there are many benefits. Here I want to highlight just one, because as Ieva at the start mentioned, we switched to GDPR most, not this one topic, but here's one example. So I see each of you has different postures. Some are sitting laid back, some are straight up. I'm usually on my right side, so we have this unique posture. And there's a company in Japan who has put hundreds of sensors on car seats to create something like not Touch ID, not Face ID, but Posture ID. If the wrong person is sitting in the car, then the car is just not starting, unless you have some other factor, like, again, face or some PIN code. So let's pretend that everyone in Europe has the system in their cars. So there we get a lot of data. We get posture of every driver for as much time as the data warehouses can hold. And we could take advantage of the data. So there's also data about accidents, and there could be a pattern that a person is sitting more laid back or fidgeting more in the seat just 5 seconds before the accident. And we could use the data to slow down the car or give some warning to the driver that, hey, you should stop. And also there the business comes in, because on those you can use it as commercial break, basically. So there is a good for everyone, both for logistics. You can drive more faster, you can have more health security, and you get business going. And of course the big three, Amazon, Google, and my favorite, Microsoft, is working on big data and providing solutions. I myself have used a lot of Microsoft solutions like Dynamics 365, which gathers data from your CRM and ERP systems and predicts the future for you based on your clients, based on companies similar to you in different parts of world and so on and so on. And that's something where you can jump in right on this day. There are some other higher up solutions, but this is the one you can use it today. But the big challenge, if you do the data mining on your own, even if you have some data already, is going through the process and getting results. So keep in mind, if you're thinking about today the big data and that it could be a thing for you, you should invest in it. Think about what will be the result. As always, think about the KPIs so you don't miss the goal.
So, and if you want to use those big data, as Kristaps explained, it has lots of lucrative business advantages, and you might reach even unimaginable business goals with Internet of Things and all those other new technologies. But in order to do so, you must have free access to data, really, to develop your business and to use them. And that's why the European Union has created a digital agenda in order, with a very ambitious aim, to create European Union the most competitive data industry and to ensure free flow of non-personal data and the protection of personal data, but also a unified framework how those personal data may be used. About personal data we spoke before, that was GDPR, which now provides this unique and unified framework for the protection of personal data. But now the European Commission is moving forward and creating regulatory frameworks how businesses could use non-personal data. And the current legal initiatives which we have to monitor and look forward to is the directive on the reuse of public sector information, which is quite crucial for many businesses who rely on creating databases using public resources. One example is databases of companies and other commercial data. These businesses very often take their information from the source company register kept by some public institution. Like in Latvia, it's a company register. In some countries, it's a court registry, which is the official institution which registers the companies, the changes in the shareholders and management boards. And then, in order for a business to reuse those data to create their own database, which is probably more easier to use than the state database, it must have access to this public information. And nowadays, very often there are obstacles to that. Either the state institution requests a payment for access, or the information is difficult to use. For example, you get the financial report of the company just in a scanned form, not in machine-readable form, and lots of obstacles. And this directive on the reuse of public sector information aims to prevent and eliminate the obstacles so that the information which is publicly available could be easily reusable. Of course, protecting confidentiality and protecting personal data, but businesses should have access to such information. Very similar initiative regards the scientific information, which also is very often locked by just a couple of stakeholders. There have to be clear and transparent criteria how it is possible to access such information for wider public. And there is a guidance on sharing private sector data for the benefit of consumers and customers, so that the businesses would create more interoperable solutions for using of their data, so that the customer would not be locked with one provider, for example, for one IT provider, but could migrate to another provider. GDPR itself actually puts a big step in that direction because it introduces a new right of data portability, that your customer can come to you and request giving you his or her personal data in machine-readable form so that he can go easily to your competitor, actually. Sorry, but yes, and give him these data, and he doesn't have to submit them from anew. And in addition, there is another directive being developed on the use of non-personal data, and a new e-privacy regulation is being currently developed. This e-privacy regulation actually, in our opinion, is going to be the next big thing. Probably after a year, we will be holding a workshop how to become e-privacy ready, because similarly as GDPR, this new regulation will affect most of businesses who do online communications, who send out email newsletters, who have web pages, who gather personal information through their web page, who use cookies. This was regulated also before by the e-privacy directive, sometimes referred to also as the cookie directive, because its purpose was to regulate how the cookies can be used and how the email communication with commercial purposes may be sent out. Perhaps you have heard about such phrases as opt-out and opt-in, and most of you have seen in those commercial emails you receive that in the bottom there is this unsubscribe option. This unsubscribe option is requested by the e-privacy laws, and now these laws are going to be more tough after the introduction of e-privacy regulation, because it will be a regulation. Again, now there are 28 different privacy laws applied in the European Union, but after the implementation of e-privacy regulation, there will be one unified law with stricter requirements as far as it seems right now. But this regulation is a little bit stuck right now. The first and more ambitious goal was that it would come into force also in May 25 together with the GDPR, but it didn't happen because there were actually lots of objections from businesses that it's too much job to comply simultaneously with the GDPR and also with this new e-privacy regulation. You have to not only go through all your data processing practices, but also through all your online communication practices, so it was postponed. And currently it seems that it might come into force somewhere in 2019. So the goal of all this within the European Union is to create a more organized, more stable, more predictable, and also more business-friendly data environment, so that the businesses can use the data, especially the non-personal data. For non-personal data, there should be as free flow with as little obstacles as possible. On the other hand, for personal data, these should be as protected as possible so that our human right to privacy is observed. So there will be new developments in this area, so let's stay tuned. So that's all from us. Do you have any questions?
Thank you. Does anyone okay.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Yeah. Ready?
I hear you.
Okay, so you spoke a lot about the business and GDPR, how it will affect business and what processes the companies need to implement and review the documents and rules and employees and suppliers and everybody. But what do you think about the government institution? I mean, police, some other guys who keeping our data. Will it affect on them as well? Are they under the GDPR regulations? Thank you.
Thank you. Very good question. Yes, in fact, they are. GDPR applies to anybody who processes data, also to the state institutions, to municipalities, to educational institutions, to schools, to kindergartens, to churches even. If you're a member of the church also has to observe the GDPR, and also to the police. With the police and courts, it is special that there will be another regulation actually, especially for courts and police, but it also comes into force on May 25. So they have to observe the same principles. The only exception, of course, is that they are not subject to those huge fines, 4% of the global turnover, because the fines would be, well, because it's administrative fine, and it would be then paid from one pocket to the next. It's paid into the state budget, so it doesn't make sense to take money from one school who has violated the GDPR and put it into the general state budget, who gives money to the school anyway. But if the state institutions and public institutions violate the GDPR, they can have civil liability. A person who has been violated can go to the court and file a suit against this public institution and request a compensation for the breach of privacy. And actually, European Union in the GDPR is making a better framework how to do this and better tools for filing such lawsuits. So we will see how it will go on.
So we have a time for one more question. Does anyone have one? Okay, so then I just want to end with the open question. Does anyone know what is the biggest lie in the whole universe? The biggest lie? Any?
That the companies who now gives us tools like Google, Microsoft, Amazon, they say that they don't have an access to our data and they don't use it. Is this the biggest one? No.
But I can tell you what it is. I have read and agreed to terms and conditions. Okay, thank you. Now we will have 30-minute break, and after that we will have a chance to listen to the most visible white hat hacker, Kristaps Sedols. So take a break, eat something, and then we will wait you here. At 1:30, the next workshop.